Commander Jack Stone rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at the blinking light on his ship's scanner. After 12 years of flying scout missions in deep space, he thought he'd seen everything. But this signal was different. It pulsed with an odd rhythm that made his skin crawl. "Computer, analyze that energy signature again," he ordered, reaching for his lukewarm coffee. The small scout ship, Pathfinder, drifted silently through the empty sector of space. This region wasn't supposed to have anything interesting. Just endless darkness between star systems. The computer's mechanical voice filled the cramped cockpit. Energy signature matches no known human or allied species patterns. Structure detected. Artificial space station, approximately 3 kilometers in length. Jack leaned forward, his interest piqued. A space station out here, in the middle of nowhere. The nearest colonized system was at least 2 weeks away at full speed. He pulled up the visual feed, and his breath caught in his throat. The station hung against the backdrop of stars like a massive black spider. Its central hub sprouted long, spindly arms that curved elegantly into the darkness. The structure was clearly alien, its surface covered in strange, swirling patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "No distress signals?" he asked, already knowing the answer. This far out, nobody would hear them anyway. "Negative. However, internal power systems appear operational. Life support systems detected." Jack drummed his fingers on his console. Protocol said he should log the location and continue his mapping mission. Unknown alien structures were above his pay grade. But something about this station called to him. Maybe it was the loneliness of 6 months in deep space, or maybe it was the soldier in him, always hungry for action. "Computer, run a full scan for weapon systems or defensive measures." Scanning. No active weapons detected. However, multiple unknown systems are operational. What Jack couldn't know, was that he was already being watched. Deep within the station's twisted corridors, in a room bathed in crimson light, a tall figure stood before a wall of holographic displays. Her scaled skin shimmered as she moved, each step graceful despite her imposing height. Lady Red, as she was known throughout this sector, smiled as she watched the tiny human ship approach. Her long fingers, tipped with retractable claws, danced across the control panel. This human was different from the usual cargo ships that stumbled into her territory. The way he moved his ship, the careful scanning patterns. This was a trained military pilot. "How interesting," she purred, her voice carrying harmonics impossible for human vocal cords to produce. "It's been so long since I've had a worthy visitor." Back on the Pathfinder, Jack had made his decision. "Computer, begin docking procedures. Standard exploration protocols." He checked his sidearm, an old-fashioned projectile weapon he preferred over energy guns, and secured his emergency pack. As he pulled on his EVA suit, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that he was making a mistake. But Jack had survived this long in deep space by trusting his instincts, and right now, they were screaming that this discovery was important. The docking procedure went smoothly, too smoothly for an abandoned station. The airlock cycled perfectly, and when Jack checked the atmosphere, it was pristine. Someone, or something, was maintaining this place. As his boots touched the station's deck, Jack failed to notice the subtle shift in the lighting, the way the corridors seemed to reshape themselves behind him. By the time he realized the airlock had sealed itself, it was already too late. The hunt had begun. Jack's boots made soft clicking sounds against the metal floor as he moved through the dimly lit corridor. The air tasted clean, too clean, like a hospital. His hand rested on his gun, years of military training keeping his nerves steady despite the growing sense of wrongness. "This is Scout Commander Jack Stone, conducting initial exploration of unknown station." He spoke into his suit's recorder. "Structure appears to be maintained, but currently unmanned. No signs of recent activity except..." He paused, studying the floor. "Except there's no dust. Nothing." A soft hum filled the air, and the lighting shifted slightly. Jack froze. The corridor behind him had changed. Where there had been a straight path back to the airlock, there was now a curved passage leading somewhere else. "Correction," he said, his voice tighter now. "Station appears to have active environmental controls and mobile architecture." He pulled out his scanner, but the readings made no sense. According to the device, he was simultaneously on 3 different levels of the station. A laugh echoed through the corridor, a musical sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Lost already, little human." The voice was feminine, but carried strange harmonics that no human throat could produce. "Most of my guests don't even notice the changes until they've been walking in circles for hours." Jack spun around, gun raised, but saw only empty corridor. "I'm Commander Jack Stone of the Human Scout Fleet. I mean no harm, but I am armed." Another laugh, closer this time. "Armed? How delightful. It's been so long since I've had a guest who could make things interesting." The lights dimmed further, taking on a reddish tint. Jack backed against a wall, trying to keep all approaches in view. "Show yourself," he demanded. "But then the game would be over too quickly," the voice purred. "And we've only just started." Jack's scanner beeped a warning. The air composition was changing. He checked his suit's seals, but before he could activate his helmet, he caught a sweet scent in the air. His vision blurred slightly. "Don't worry," the voice said. "Just something to make our game more entertaining." Jack's military training kicked in. He pulled his emergency rebreather from his belt and slapped it over his mouth and nose. His head cleared almost immediately, but now he could hear movement, something large moving through the walls or ceiling. "Clever boy," the voice said, sounding pleased. "Most don't think to pack respiratory gear, but then, most of my visitors aren't military trained." Jack started moving, picking his direction at random. He needed to find a control room, a computer terminal, anything that might help him understand what he was dealing with. "Running already?" The voice followed him. The last one ran too. Kept running until he collapsed from exhaustion. "Boring. But you're different, aren't you, Commander Stone?" The corridor had split into 3 paths. Jack checked his scanner again. Useless. The readings were getting more confused, not less. He picked the right path and sprinted. Yes, the voice was excited now. "Run, fight, think. Show me what makes humans so interesting." Jack burst through a doorway into a massive chamber. The ceiling was lost in darkness above, and walkways crisscrossed the space like a giant web. In the center, suspended by cables, hung his ship, the Pathfinder. "Welcome to my web," the voice whispered, now seeming to come from directly behind him. "I am Lady Red. And you, Commander Stone, are going to help me understand why humans are considered the most dangerous prey in the galaxy." Jack turned slowly, his gun steady despite his pounding heart. What he saw made his blood run cold. Lady Red stood nearly 3 meters tall, her body covered in scales that shimmered like polished rubies. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed along her arms and neck, casting dancing shadows across her angular face. Her eyes were the most striking feature, large, cat-like pupils surrounded by golden irises that seemed to glow in the dim light. "You're not running," she said, tilting her head. Her mouth moved differently than a human's, revealing glimpses of sharp teeth. "Most run when they first see me." Jack kept his gun steady, though he doubted it would do much against her armored scales. "Running just makes you a target. First rule of survival training." A sound like chiming bells filled the air. Her laugh. "Oh, I did choose well this time." She moved with liquid grace, circling him. Despite her size, her movements were completely silent. "Tell me, Commander Stone, what do you know of my species?" "Nothing," Jack admitted. "I've never seen anyone like you." "We are the Crimson Hunters," she said, her bioluminescent patterns flaring brighter. "For 10,000 years, we have collected specimens from across the galaxy. The strongest, the smartest, the most interesting." She gestured at the walls, and lights came on, revealing dozens of stasis pods. Inside each one was a different alien species, perfectly preserved. Jack's stomach turned. "You're a trophy hunter." "A collector," she corrected, still circling. "And you, Commander, are the first human I've managed to lure into my web. Your species is notoriously difficult to catch. Always traveling in groups, always armed, always suspicious." "Sorry to disappoint," Jack said, tracking her movement. "I'm just a scout." Lady Red stopped directly in front of him. "No, you're exactly what I hoped for. Military trained, experienced in survival, intelligent enough to notice the details others miss." She leaned down, bringing her face close to his. "But also curious enough to ignore your better judgment." Jack didn't flinch. "So what now? I join your collection." "That depends," she purred, her patterns shifting to a deeper red. "I have a proposition for you, Commander Stone. One night. That's all I ask. One night of your company, your conversation, your presence. Do this, and you may leave with your ship and your freedom." "And if I refuse?" She gestured at an empty stasis pod. "Then you become part of my permanent collection. Though I would rather not. Living specimens are so much more engaging." Jack lowered his gun slightly. "You're lonely," he said, realization dawning. "All this, the hunt, the collection. You're lonely out here in the dark." Lady Red's patterns flickered, her composure slipping for just a moment. "Careful, Commander. Understanding your captor can be dangerous." She straightened up, towering over him again. "But yes, perhaps I am. My species is few in number, scattered across the stars. We seek worthy companions through the hunt. And if I agree to your terms, how do I know you'll keep your word?" "The hunt has rules, Commander. Sacred rules. Break them, and we lose our honor. I have never broken my word." She extended a clawed hand. "One night. That's all I ask." Jack looked at her hand, then at the stasis pods, then at his ship hanging above them. His mind raced, analyzing options, looking for angles. Then he had an idea. "I have a counteroffer," he said, holstering his gun. "One that might interest a hunter of your caliber." Lady Red's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Speak, human. You have my attention." Jack stood tall despite being dwarfed by Lady Red's imposing height. "You want to understand why humans are considered dangerous prey. Let me show you. Give me until your station's artificial dawn. 6 hours. If you can catch me before then, I'll stay here forever, willingly. But if I survive until dawn, I go free, and you never hunt humans again." Lady Red's bioluminescent patterns rippled with amusement. "You would challenge me?" "In my own hunting grounds." Her golden eyes narrowed. "Interesting, but hardly fair. I know every corner of this station." "Exactly," Jack said, allowing himself a small smile. "You have every advantage. The perfect hunter in her perfect web. So if one human can survive for 6 hours, it proves we're too dangerous to hunt. Worth more as allies than trophies." She circled him again. But this time her movement was different. Predatory, calculating. "And if I catch you, then you get what you wanted. A willing companion who's proven their worth. No stasis pod needed." Jack gestured at her collection. "Better than an unconscious trophy, isn't it?" Lady Red stopped in front of him, her head tilted as she considered his offer. 6 hours is a long time, Commander Stone. My hunting grounds are vast. The central biodome alone contains terrain from 12 different worlds. Many places to hide, or to die. Scared I might win, Jack taunted gently. Her laugh echoed through the chamber. "Brave and clever. Very well, human. I accept your challenge with one addition." She touched a control panel on her wrist, and a holographic map appeared between them. The biodome. 4 square kilometers of hunting ground. Multiple terrains, as I said. But to make it interesting, the map highlighted several areas in red. These are survival catches. Food, water, even some basic weapons. You'll need them. The biodome's environment isn't kind to humans. Reach them, and they're yours to use. And the catch. I've released some of my other specimens into the biodome. Nothing sentient, but all dangerous. You won't just be hiding from me. Her patterns pulsed with excitement. Consider it motivation to keep moving. Jack studied the map, memorizing the cache locations. Any other rules I should know? No returning to this area or your ship. No disabling station systems. Everything else. She grinned, showing those sharp teeth. Everything else is fair game. Use whatever you find, however you wish. Survive, and you win. And if I die in there? You won't, she said with surprising firmness. My specimens are dangerous, but I can control them. This is a test, Commander, not an execution. I want to see your skills, your adaptability. Death would spoil the game. Jack nodded slowly. When do we start? Lady Red's patterns shifted to a deep, pulsing crimson. I'll give you a 5-minute head start. The biodome entrance is through that door. She pointed to a large airlock. I suggest you run fast, Commander Stone. And remember, her voice dropped lower. I can see in the dark. Jack turned toward the airlock, his mind already planning routes and strategies. Before he reached it, her voice called out once more. Oh, and Commander, while we're being sporting. She touched her wrist control again, and his gun dissolved into metallic dust. Let's keep this interesting, shall we? The airlock hissed open. Beyond it, Jack could see a massive dark space stretching into the distance. Somewhere in there were the supplies he'd need to survive. And soon, a very determined Huntress would be on his trail. He took a deep breath and stepped through. The hunt was about to begin. Jack ran through the darkness of the biodome, his boots crunching on what felt like frozen soil. As his eyes adjusted, he could make out the shapes of alien trees towering above him, their branches creating a thick canopy that blocked the dim emergency lighting from above. The first catch point was 2 kilometers away. 4 minutes left of his head start. A howl echoed through the artificial forest, something that sounded like a mix between a wolf and a bird, one of Lady Red's specimens announcing its presence. Jack kept moving, using the trees for cover. 3 minutes. He found a fallen log covered in glowing moss and paused just long enough to grab handfuls of it, stuffing the moss into his pockets. If he was right about Lady Red's vision, he'd need this. 2 minutes. The terrain changed abruptly, the frozen forest giving way to a steaming swamp. Jack could see one of the cache points glowing on a small island about 50 meters into the muck. It would take too long to reach it safely. A trap. 1 minute. He changed direction, moving along the swamp's edge. Better to find different supplies than get caught in the open. The sound of splashing behind him suggested something was following in the water. Time up. Ready or not, Commander. Lady Red's voice echoed through the dome. The hunt begins. Jack pressed himself against a massive tree trunk, controlling his breathing. He could hear her moving through the forest, not trying to be silent now, wanting him to know she was coming. Your heart rate is elevated, she called out. I can smell your adrenaline. Exciting, isn't it? Jack pulled out some of the glowing moss, crushing it in his hands. The bioluminescent liquid stained his fingers. Quickly, he drew streaks across his uniform and face. A crashing sound from the swamp made him freeze. Something large was emerging from the water. Lady Red's laugh drifted through the trees. Ah, you've met one of my swamp hunters. Fascinating creatures. They can track body heat through solid objects. Jack moved away from the sound, keeping low. The crushed moss was working. Its bioluminescent properties were interfering with the natural patterns of light and shadow. Basic counter-sniper technique, adapted for an alien hunt. He caught a glimpse of Lady Red through the trees, her crimson scales blending perfectly with the shadows, only her golden eyes giving her away. She was moving parallel to him, herding him toward something. Jack dropped and rolled just as a net of energy crackled through the space where he'd been standing. Not trying to catch him yet, just testing his reflexes. Very good. Lady Red sounded genuinely pleased. Most prey run straight into the trap. Jack used her voice to track her position and moved in the opposite direction. He needed to reach the second catch point, but she was between him and it. Unless. He pulled out more moss, crushed it, and threw it high into the branches above. The glowing liquid scattered like rainfall, creating dozens of false movement patterns. Clever boy, Lady Red purred, using my own bioluminescence against me. But remember, her voice came from much closer. I've been hunting far longer than you've been alive. Jack broke into a sprint as something massive crashed through the trees behind him. He could hear Lady Red's excited laugh mixing with the sounds of pursuit. 5.5 hours to go, and he was starting to enjoy himself. 3 hours had passed since the hunt began. Jack crouched in a small cave made of glowing crystals, catching his breath. He'd managed to reach 2 catch points, gathering water, some alien protein bars, and a strange device that seemed to disrupt bioelectrical fields. His uniform was torn and muddy, but he was unharmed. Lady Red's voice echoed through the crystal cave. Do you know what fascinates me most about humans, Commander? Her shadow passed across the cave entrance. It's not your strength or speed. It's your ability to learn. Jack remained still, using a technique from his survival training, controlling his breathing to nearly nothing. The crystal cave's electromagnetic properties helped mask his presence. Most prey species rely on instinct, she continued. They run the same way, hide the same way, fight the same way. But you, she sounded almost admiring. You adapt. Every time I almost catch you, you try something new. Jack smiled despite himself. She wasn't wrong. In the past 3 hours, he'd used the glowing moss to create false trails, turned her own specimens against her by leading them into her path, and even managed to temporarily trap her in a patch of sticky vegetation. Maybe you're learning too, he called out, quickly moving to a different spot in the cave. You haven't used the same hunting technique twice. Her laugh bounced off the crystals. Indeed. It's been refreshing. Most hunts become boring after the first hour. But you, Commander Stone, you make me think. Make me work. A sudden movement caught Jack's eye. One of the crystal formations was shifting, revealing Lady Red's form as her scales adjusted to match their glow. She'd been there the whole time. Impressive camouflage, Jack said, already moving. But instead of running, he moved closer to her. The unexpected action made her pause. Most prey runs away, she said, her head tilting in curiosity. I'm not prey, Jack replied. And I think you know that. This isn't really about hunting, is it? It's about finding equals. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to a softer purple hue. Perceptive. My species, we don't just hunt for sport or food. We hunt to find those worthy of interaction. Those who can challenge us, teach us, surprise us. She stepped fully out of the crystal wall. In 3 hours, you've shown more ingenuity than most species show in days. Is that why your collection is so small? Jack gestured at the distant ceiling. You only keep the ones who don't measure up. Lady Red's patterns pulsed thoughtfully. The collection serves a purpose. Those who fail teach us about their species' limitations. Those who succeed. She looked directly at him. Those who succeed become part of our knowledge exchange. We learn from them. They learn from us. Some even become diplomatic links between our peoples. And how many have succeeded? 3. In 10,000 years. Her eyes gleamed. Would you like to be the 4th? Jack activated the bioelectrical disruptor he'd found, causing Lady Red's camouflage to falter. Ask me again in 3 hours, if you can catch me. He dove through a gap in the crystals as she laughed in delight. Run then, clever human. Show me what else you can teach me. Jack sprinted into the darker part of the biodome, his mind racing with new possibilities. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving humanity's worth as equals, as potential allies. 3 hours to prove our worth, he muttered, planning his next move. No pressure. The artificial dawn was 30 minutes away. Jack stood in the center of the biodome's desert zone, his back against a rock formation. He was tired, sore, but still alert. The past 5.5 hours had taught him more about survival than his entire military career. Giving up the shadows, Commander. Lady Red's voice carried across the sand. She emerged from behind a distant dune, walking slowly toward him. Her scales gleamed in the gradually brightening light. Rather bold for your final stand. Not giving up, Jack said, staying still. Just changing the game one last time. He had arranged glowing moss in patterns around the area, not to hide this time, but to create something else. Lady Red stopped, her golden eyes studying the moss patterns. Her head tilted as she recognized the arrangement. These are navigation marks, star patterns. Her patterns flickered with surprise. You've mapped my hunting grounds using my own bioluminescent markers. Jack nodded. Your biodome isn't just random terrain. It's arranged like a star chart, each zone representing different systems you've visited. Once I realized that I could predict the layout. He gestured around them. This spot, it represents your home system. Her patterns shifted to deep blue, a color he hadn't seen before. In 6 hours, you didn't just survive. You understood. You learned our history, our methods, our meaning. She moved closer, but not as a hunter now. No prey has ever done that. Because I was never prey, Jack said firmly. And you weren't really hunting. This whole setup, the station, the collection, the challenges, it's all an elaborate test. A way to find species capable of truly understanding yours. The artificial dawn began to break, sending rays of light through the biodome's curved ceiling. Lady Red stood just a few meters from Jack now, her expression unreadable, but her pattern swirling with complex colors. 5 minutes until dawn, she said softly. I could still catch you. You could try, Jack smiled. But that's not what you want anymore, is it? Lady Red's laugh was different now. Warmer, genuine. No, it's not. You've proven far more than just humanity's survival skills, Commander Stone. You've proven your species' capacity for understanding, adaptation, and insight. She extended her hand, but not to grab him. A gesture of equality. The hunt is over. You've more than earned your freedom. Jack took her hand, noting how careful she was with her claws. And the agreement about humans. My people will know that humans are not for hunting, she said firmly. Instead, I will recommend you as potential allies. Your ship's databanks contain enough evidence of your species' achievements to support my recommendation. You accessed my ship? Jack asked, impressed. Of course, while you were learning about me, I was learning about you. Her patterns shifted to a bright, almost playful color. Your species has great potential. Perhaps, she paused, seeming almost hesitant for the first time. Perhaps you could stay a bit longer. There is much we could learn from each other. The artificial dawn reached its peak, flooding the biodome with light. Jack looked at his torn uniform, thought about his lonely scout mission, and made a decision. I need to report in first, he said. Let my people know I'm alive. But after that, he smiled. I think the human scout fleet would be very interested in establishing diplomatic relations with the Crimson Hunters. Lady Red's patterns blazed with joy. Then the hunt has served its true purpose. Welcome, Commander Stone, to a whole new kind of adventure. Above them, the station's systems began powering up fully, preparing for a new chapter in both their species' histories.